Hello everyone and welcome to the Good Old Gamer. So after the past month or so, I've been showing you guys with the right tools and a little bit of tweaking know-how, you can extract extreme amounts of performance out of your current CPUs. And a lot of you guys are like, I have no idea how to even get started on this. So you guys kind of convinced me to go ahead and do a Samsung Bdie, I guess you could say, starter's guide, and that's what we're going to be doing here today. So if you're interested in getting the maximum amount of performance out of your DDR4 system, this is the video for you. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who loves learning and wants to explore their creativity and learn new skills. Invest in yourself and your personal growth. Benefits of Skillshare are it's an ad-free platform, so you can stay in your zone while exploring your new skills. New and premium classes are launched each and every week, so there's always something new to discover. And the entire catalog is now available with subtitles in Spanish, French, Portuguese, and German. I've worked with and used Skillshare for quite some time now. As you guys may have noticed, my B-roll in my videos is substantially better than what it used to be. And much of that has to do with taking the classes on Skillshare in photography and videography, such as Cinematography Basics, Understanding Filmmaking Style by Zach Mulligan. So if you're interested in upping your game or learning something new, I have a special offer for you. The first 1,000 people to use the link in the video description will get 1 month free trial of Skillshare. So don't wait and go ahead and take advantage of this limited time offer here today. All right, so before we start getting into stuff, number one, you need Samsung Bdie memory. This does not work if you have any other memory type. This does not apply. You can blow up your system and destroy everything if you do not have Samsung Bdie. I will show you how to identify whether you have Bdie or not and things like that. So we're going to go through all that in this video. So do not just go, hey, I'm just going to do what Chris does and plop in his settings and everything will work out fine. Don't do that unless you have the right tools for the job. And for gaming, Samsung Bdie memory kits are what you need for the job. So if you need some, links are in the video description down below. Amazon's got them on sale, so go ahead and pick them up there. With that little disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so first things first, you're gonna need to download a few tools. I have links to all of these in the video description, so you can go ahead and get them. So we're gonna be using OCCT. This is gonna be our stability test tool. This will test both CPU and RAM, so it pretty much does everything that you need to get started in overclocking. So we'll go a little bit more detail into that. IDA64, so we're gonna go ahead and run this. This is a trial version, but you know, you can buy it if you want to, but it shouldn't take you that long to get it going. So you just use the trial. And the only thing we care about is under benchmark, and that is memory latency. So right now, I just popped in a Ryzen 5600. I have not tuned this at all. This will be used in an upcoming test. So we're starting from scratch. So if you go under IDA and you run the latency benchmark, we're gonna go ahead and give it a minute. With completely stock out of the box settings, I haven't touched anything, haven't tuned anything. We're getting 80.9 nanoseconds. So I'll put in the video description below what your target should be for what CPUs, but for a Zen 3, the goal is to get around 55 nanoseconds. Below is preferable, but around 55 would be good. So 80.9 is terrible. For Zen 2, it would be about 65. For Zen 1, also 65. For Intel, however, this is one of Intel's major advantages. Intel can get much, much lower than AMD on this. And for you guys wondering, what does this mean? This is how short of time it takes to get data from the RAM to the system, to the CPU, and that sort of stuff. So the shorter amount of time this is, basically the more data it can churn through, and the less idle your CPU is. My goal for Intel systems is to just get it under 50 nanoseconds. You can push further. I believe it's Comet Lake can get under 40, which is really, really tight. But anything under 50 is usually pretty good. For Alder Lake, Rocket Lake, or even Comet Lake, it's still pretty good. Then, of course, you need CPU Z, so you can check and see if your settings are actually going through. So right here, we got the Ryzen 5, Veramir, 3.5, whatever. We're not going to be overclocking the CPU. If you don't know how to do that, well, there's a million videos that'll show you how to do that one. The big one that we're looking at is memory. We want to make sure that our uncore frequency, this is actually our F clock or Infinity Fabric clock, We want this to stay 1-to-1 with our DRAM. So this way we can get the Infinity Fabric running as fast as possible and get maximum performance out of the system. For Intel, you can clock this separately, which is really nice, and you can push that to the moon, and it's not reliant on the DRAM frequency. But for AMD chips, it is. So we're going to be talking about this as we go through. And then, as I mentioned before, if you're not sure if you have Samsung Bdie, you could use Typhoon. I have a link to this down in the video description. Let's just go ahead and run this. All right, so once it loads up, just go to EEPROM, go to read one of your memory sticks, and it'll tell you what you have. All right, once that pulls up, you can see we got the manufacturer of the RAM. That doesn't matter, but we want the manufacturer of the chips, Samsung, and then under die density / count, you have 8 GB of Bdie. So if you don't see Samsung and Bdie, well, it's time to sell your RAM and go ahead and pick some up. Because literally everything I'm going to show you is not really achievable on any other memory kit. Now, there are other good DDR4 kits out there. They're just not as good. So why would you settle for second best? And one last thing that I want to mention before I go ahead and start showing you guys how to do this. The main reason why the latency test is key is because this is going to have the greatest impact on gaming performance. Memory bandwidth doesn't matter. So don't worry about the speed of your RAM. You can run DDR4 3200, but if you're running it at like CL12, that's going to be way better than 3600 at C14. Basically, just run IDA and see whichever one has the lowest latency. That's the one you want to go with. So RAM speed doesn't matter that much. Obviously, you want the maximum speed that you can get while having the tightest timing. So there's a lot of trade-offs that you have to figure out. Luckily, with AMD, they kind of keep you in a box and make it pretty easy on which way to go. All right, so now we're in the BIOS. This is where you're going to spend all of your time. Don't do any of these things within Windows. You need to do this from the BIOS. If you're afraid of the BIOS, well, hopefully this will give you encouragement to not be afraid, but if you don't want to touch settings, trust me, memory overclocking is just not for you. So I'm using the MSI B550-A Pro motherboard, so not super expensive, pretty cheap board. MSI, I just prefer the way that their overclocking works, and the stability seems to be a little bit better than most of the rest. ASUS boards have some weird names on stuff. So, all right, we're going to go under overclock. I guess you can't see because I'm in the way, but there's a little OC tab. This is where we're going to be spending our time. So, like I said, I'm not going to bother overclocking the CPU here. First thing that I always do is I just enable XMP. So this is DDR4 4400, 19, 19, 19, 39. Obviously, those are crap timings, but it's fine. It'll just load the secondary and tertiary timings that are on XMP, which we know the memory can handle that, right? However, this CPU cannot handle 4400 megahertz RAM, not in a 1-to-1 configuration. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to lower this down to 3600. So that's going to give us an F clock of 1800 megahertz. For Zen 3, that's no problem. For Zen 2, that's about the maximum you're going to be able to get. And then for Zen 1, don't worry about it. They're linked. The most you're really going to get out of that's maybe 3400. But trust me, just if you have a Zen 1 chip and you saw my last video, it's time to upgrade. So anyways, we're going to start at 3600 because for Zen 3, that's pretty easy. And then I manually go ahead and put in the proper F clock. So that is 1800 megahertz. So it's half of what your RAM speed is. And we're going to leave the timings the same. Okay. And then that's it. That's all we're going to do. And then we're going to boot into Windows. All right. Assuming you booted into Windows successfully, now first thing you want to do is check CPU-Z and make sure that your settings actually took. Sometimes if your motherboard says, no, 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 you can't do that, it'll just automatically change settings for you. So like I said, just go under the memory tab. So we have the uncore or F clock that's coming in at 1800 megahertz and our DRAM also 1800 megahertz. So cool. Everything seems to be going okay on that front. Our timings are terrible, but we'll deal with that later. Next up, we're going to load up OCCT and we're going to run a memory stability test just to make sure that the RAM is good. So once you load up, just go under memory. I go ahead and change this to 10 minutes. I do 10 minutes per configuration because you don't want to do 30 minutes every time you change a setting. If it'll last 10 minutes, it should be good enough for you to continue tweaking. If it can't last 10 minutes, then you need to start reverting back on things. You want to make sure that you use the AVX2 instruction set, assuming that you have that. If not, just use SSE. Whatever, but AVX2 if available. I leave this on auto, and then all you have to do is just hit run. And you have to wait 10 seconds because they want you to support them, which you should. I mean, this is an excellent program. You know, throw them a $5 or something, and then they'll keep developing it. But yeah, go ahead, let that go, and assuming everything passes, then we'll move on to the next step. Let's continue going. So all you do is you just go back in and up your frequency. I'm going to go ahead and go to straight up to 3800. Most Zen 3 CPUs should be able to hit this. Make sure you also up your F clocked, because if you don't, they're going to be mismatched and then you're going to start crashing. So make sure that they're the same. That's why I manually set my F clock. So this way there's no jiggery or pokery that the motherboard does and screw something up. It should do what you tell it to do. The worst overclocking motherboards are the ones where the motherboard does what it wants and not what you tell it to. So if you have a board that just doesn't listen to you and what you want to do, that's when you know you should probably get a new motherboard. But all right, we're going to go ahead and test this out. Assuming this is good, I'm just going to leave it there, and then I'm going to jump in and show you how to start tuning timings. So once again, we run OCCT, and assuming the 10 minutes go good, then that's when we're going to start tuning, and then we're going to start running IDA as well to see how low our latency is getting. Now, assuming that passed, you can go ahead and start tuning your RAM. But assuming that it didn't pass, you can go ahead and fix that by going ahead and raising up your SoC voltage. That's what we have highlighted here. And your SoC voltage is basically your internal memory controller. So you throw more voltage at it, you can hit higher frequencies. Personally, I don't like going above 1.2 volts. You can push it to 1.3 if you like, 1.25 for stability. You know, you can push it as far as you want as long as you can keep the CPU cool enough. So depending on what cooler you're using, but 1.2 on an AMD chip is literally the most I've ever needed. And mine passes at 1.1 at 1900. I'm definitely gonna be pushing to 2000, which a lot of people don't think is a thing, but it is. But still, I mean, you could just leave it here. Anyways, next step, we want to up our RAM voltage. We want to put it to 1.5 volts. Reason why we want to do this is we want to have the extra headroom. So while we're tuning, we can go ahead and do that. And then once you got your timings the way that you want, then you start backing down the voltage, testing in between, and making sure that you're stable. So once we have our voltage set there, I am, just for stability's sake, just gonna ramp this up to 1.2 volts. It's not a big deal. You can go ahead and do that. The motherboard should go in red if you're pushing like to extreme voltages. Just make sure you have good cooling. All right, so then next step, let's go under DRAM configuration. So the key here is we want to start with the cast latency. This is the number everybody talks about because it's the hardest one to get down. So for Samsung Bdie, up to about 4,000 megahertz, the goal is to get to CL14. So we're just gonna start with that, and that's it. That's the only timing we're gonna change. We're gonna see if we can hit C14 with the settings that we have in here right now. All right, so Windows is booted. I'm gonna go ahead and load up OCCT, and we're going to test the RAM. As you can tell, this is very time consuming because every time you change something, you have to verify that it's working. Now, you can go ahead, if you're familiar with Samsung Bdie a little bit, you can lower this to about 5 minutes. As I'm like 99.9% sure that this is gonna work, I'm just gonna lower it to a 5-minute test, see if we're good, and then continue to push. But I strongly recommend sticking with the 10 minutes if this is your first time messing around with memory overclocking of any kind, or especially Samsung Bdie memory. So yeah, so stick with the 10 minutes. Make sure you got something else to do while you're doing this, because most of this is just change the setting, wait, change the setting, and wait. All right, so after you get your cast latency to wherever you want it to be, and until you're hitting errors, then you want to change the rest of your timings. So like right here, I'm going to do 14, 14, 14, 28. So for Samsung Bdie, it's very easy for the rest of the timings to follow the cast latency. So if you get to 13, you can do 13, 13, 13, whatever. Typically, from my experience, that will work no problem. So you can change a bunch of settings at once. And then for your TRAS, what I recommend is you just add your cast latency to one of your other numbers. So in this case, 14 plus 14, just go to 28. Once again, I personally never had errors or issues with that happening, but you can go ahead and test each one individually if you want to be very, very vigilant. But for me, once the cast is locked in, I've never had a problem getting the other ones to work. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of skip ahead a little bit. After you do this, you should run OCCT again. Once again, I've used this memory kit a bunch of times, so I'm just gonna kind of cheat. I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys the Trc. So this is another one that you definitely wanna pay attention to. And this one right here, typically you can get 50 without issue. So I'd recommend just starting there. And then the next big one is the Trfc. So this one right here is one that the Samsung Bdies are really, really high. As you can see, it's at 666, which is extremely high. In reality, you shouldn't have any problems going all the way down to 260. And that's going to go ahead and make a big difference. Now, assuming the 260 is good and all these settings are good, personally, I leave the primary timings there. I don't touch them anymore. Just make sure you have the 1T command rate and make sure, whatever your CAS is, line it up and then double that. You're going to be fine there. And then what you want to do with the Trfc is go down in 20 increments until you hit instability. For me, the lowest I've ever really been able to get is about 220. So usually I stop around the 230 mark if I don't feel like messing with it. But if you want to get really big into the tuning, you can do so. Now, if you're a tweaker, you're going to want to go through and adjust all of these timings. But in reality, assuming all of this works right here, you're pretty much done. I would tweak the Trfc down a little bit further, maybe to like 240, something like that. And then for the Trc, I'd go down to about 40. And assuming all of that works, then I'm done. I don't go any further than that. The secondary and tertiary timings just simply don't have that big of an impact on the gaming performance. You can go ahead and do whatever you want from there, but in reality, that's about it. And then you're pretty much good to go. So I'm going to tune this up a little bit, and then we'll be back, and I'm going to show you the IDA benchmark. Well, alrighty guys, after wrapping up the last bit of OCCT testing, we seem to be good. So let's go ahead and jump on over to CPU-Z, and I can show you guys the settings. I think I tuned them down just a little bit further, just like what I was saying, but not too crazy. Here we go. So we got the DRAM still at 1900, the F clock also 1900 megahertz, CL14, we got 14, 14, 28, and then TRC down to 42. And then I also got the Trfc down to 240 and figured I'll just leave it there. So, all right, now with that out of the way, now it's time to go check out IDA. We saw we were at, what, 80 something last time? 80 on the latency? Somewhere in that neighborhood. So let's see where we are now. And poof, there we are, 52.9 nanoseconds. So that's well under our goal. So we're now done. Now, I know a lot of people be like, well, you can tune this, you can tune that. Sure, you can do that if you want to, but we've already achieved the goal. Meaning if you push it any further, the returns versus time is going to be so diminished, it's not really worth it. So we're done. We got there. We got our memory overclock. So what I recommend to do now is to run an overnight Mem test or whatever memory stress test you want to do. You can do OCCT if you want to for like an 8-hour or 12-hour test or something, and just let it go for a really long time. Assuming you have no errors, then you know you're perfectly stable. And then poof, you're good to go. And that's it. And you enjoy your games, you get a massive performance increase. And all you had to do was spend a little bit of money on some Bdie if you didn't have some already, and a little bit of time, and poof, there you go. 20-ish%, maybe 10, depending on your CPU. With Zen 3, you only get about 10%, but hey, that's still 10%, which means you're only about 5% away from Zen 3D without having to pay for a Zen 3D. So, I mean, that's still good. And, you can tweak your core and all the rest of that sort of stuff yourself. So, yeah, everything's looking good. I hope you guys found this interesting and useful. If you don't have Samsung Bdie, I can't stress enough, pick it up now before the supplies run out, and you guys can't get them at reasonable price points. They've been going for about $80 on Amazon for the 4000 kit, which is the one that I used on most of the tests. This one's just a little bit different. It's the same chips, they just call it something different with a different XMP profile. So I'd recommend going that route. 80 bucks is really good, and about $20 more than a standard 16 gig kit. Now, I also do want to mention if you need more than 16 gigabytes of RAM and you buy 2 of the kits, you may not get as high a frequency on your DRAM. So especially on AMD platforms, they hate having 4 DIMMs. If you do that, you might only be able to get 3600 megahertz, and that can hit your F clock, and that could be a bit of a problem. If you did want to get 32 gigs of Samsung Bdie in 2 sticks, so 2 16 sticks, those are very expensive, ranging from anywhere from like $250 to $300. So that is significantly more. So I strongly recommend going with the Vipers. And even if you can only hit, let's say 3600, you can tune that all the way on down. Similar timings will probably be 14, 14, 14. You might be able to pare back some of the other timings a little bit further, but C14 is probably the best you're going to get out of it. You could try for C12, but unless you're super lucky and using active cooling, I just don't think that that would happen at something like 3600. So I just want to let you guys know you may not get these same results if you're using 4 DIMM sticks. It really depends on your motherboard more than anything else. CPU has some impact on that, but it's really dependent on the motherboard. And it doesn't even matter if you have like a $500 motherboard, that could still be junk at it. And a $50 motherboard may be better. It's pretty random, and I don't want to go into that. I just wanted to make you aware that that is a thing. But for a game box, if your primary goal is to game at the highest level, get the most frame rate for your money, 16 gigabytes is just fine. I've not yet seen a game hit more than 11 gigabytes in my testing and all the games that I play, honestly. Now, you may have some other needs, but I just wanted to make you aware of that. Well, alright guys, if you like this video, please smash the like button. Please share this one around. I know a lot of people are very interested in this, and hopefully this will get people kind of going and getting them on the right track in terms of starting with the memory overclocking. So I want to thank you all for your support and joining me here today, and I look forward to catching you guys in the next video.